Salutations once again to the Truth Core, whoever or wherever you may be on the planet. This is John Lash coming to you once again, or coming at you, or who knows, coming through you, whatever, with an essential message about myself and my message. As a teacher, using writings and recordings and the internet as my platform to teach over many years, I've produced a fair amount of material. And in this material, I have a habit of talking to you as if you know about the material. Something that I rarely do, which I know to be a good practice of many teachers, many people who speak on the internet, is to address the audience from square one, as if you don't know anything about what I'm going to talk to you about. Well, I just don't do that. I don't come across in that way. And of course, that can, in some respects, be a disadvantage. So it occurred to me the other day, what would happen if I decided to give a short talk about the fundamentals of what I teach and to present it to you as if you had never heard anything else about me or about planetary tantra, the Terma of Gaia Awakening, metahistory.org, and Nematta, the Sophianic School of Arts and Sciences. So that's what I'm going to try to do in this little talk that I'm recording right here, right now. So I invite you to consider that I suddenly appear before you, like the genie that comes out of the bottle. And there I am, hovering in the air, and I'm going to tell you about the Gnostic view of life, assuming that you know absolutely nothing about it. First of all, I begin with a distinction, which is that I don't teach Gnosticism. I teach the living Gnosis today. So, although I am a self-assumed scholar of Gnosticism, I don't look back to those ancient texts such as the Nag Hammadi writings. And I certainly do not intend in any way to just simply revive Gnosticism or drag you through all of that ancient material such as it is. No, that is not my intention. My intention is to bring to your attention what is the living Gnosis today. So, how do I begin? Well, the beginning is really simple. In the Gnostic view of life, what you experience today as your life and the entire event happening around and across the planet Earth is a divine experiment. You are in a divine experiment. And the Earth, as you see it, is the laboratory setting for this experiment. Nature is the laboratory. The biosphere is the setting of this experiment, and that is not a metaphor. That is a literal proposition. So when you go outside, let's say in the country, you stand in a field, you look around you, you see the plants, you see some animals, maybe some domestic animals, maybe some wild animals. You see the trees, you see the mountains, the rivers, and you see the sky above it. What do you say? What do you literally say? You see that you are standing in a domed laboratory, as if you were standing on a flat surface, and stretching over that surface was a dome. So you are sealed hermetically into a dome called the biosphere. And that dome is the setting for the divine experiment. I would say, please tell me what you think, that that's a pretty good start. As an initial proposition, it's user-friendly, it's simple, it's not difficult to grasp. It begs certain questions, such as, well, how did this experiment originate? What are the particular conditions or parameters of the experiment? What is the purpose of the experiment? What is it intended to prove or to show? And these are questions one would naturally ask of any experiment. So they are fitting and appropriate questions. And in the Gnostic view of life, you can access a complete, rich, and profound explanation of this experiment. And you cannot find that explanation anywhere else in science or religion or any spiritual or metaphysical system in the world today. Let's consider first the conditions of this experiment, the immediate conditions as you perceive it. But this brings up the question of how you perceive the earth. Now, some people assume that the shape of the entire earth is spherical, or technically an oblate spheroid. It's not a perfect sphere. The planetary body is an oblate spheroid, according to certain people. According to others, the earth is entirely flat. Now, I've addressed this question of flat earth theory in other talks, and I won't distract you by going into that argument. But I will point out something which, as far as I know, no advocate of flat earth theory has ever considered. By that I mean that the earth is an anamorph. The actual physical material body of the earth is an anamorph. A-N-A-M-O-R-P-H. If you want to know what an anamorph is, and I do encourage that you investigate it, go first to a painting that was done in 1533. It's a famous painting by Hans Holbein the Younger, and it's called The Ambassadors, and it has an anamorph in it. It has a strange, elongated structure at the bottom of the painting, which seems to have nothing to do with the portrayal of a certain regent, I forget who it is, a king, receiving the ambassadors. So, what on earth is this strange shape doing at the bottom of the painting by Hans Holbein the Younger? Well, it's an anamorph. If you look at it straight on, you can't see what it is. But if you come into the gallery where the painting is hung at a certain angle, and I believe that angle is quite precise, something like 20 degrees, I don't know, and you look at the painting sideways or slantways, you see that it's a painting of a skull. So it looks like a skull when you're standing looking at an angle, but when you come around and you view the painting frontally, it doesn't look like a skull. That's an anamorph. So one of the first things that you can learn, and it is a wonderful piece of instruction, is that the earth is an anamorph, and the shape of it depends on the angle that you look at it. So you, walking around in a domed laboratory, happen to see the shape of the planetary body as if it is more or less flat. Of course, there are the contours of the horizon. But if you are in some places where it is really flat, like out in the middle of the ocean or in a desert area, it appears to be almost perfectly flat, although a curvature can be detected. So what you're seeing is an anamorphic projection of the Earth into your field of projection. The shape of the Earth translates itself into your field of projection in a way that is user-friendly for you, obviously. You don't have to know that the Earth is a sphere, that it is a planet traveling at 18.6 miles an hour in its orbit around the sun and rotating on its axis every 24 hours, and that the entire solar system is moving through the galactic arms at a certain rate in a certain direction, and that the galaxy itself is spinning at a certain rate and also floating and drifting through the universe at a certain velocity. You don't have to know all that. You don't have to occupy yourself with all that. But all that is the ultimate setting of the divine experiment. That being so, one thing that you can know with confidence from the outset is that the divine experiment has been set up in a user-friendly way to your advantage and for your pleasure, so that you can experience it in a way that is conformable to the limitations of your senses without any disorientation regarding the larger framework of the universe in which the divine experiment is located. How lovely is that? Someone, and we'll get to who pretty soon, someone has your best interests in mind, and someone has designed this experiment so you're comfortable with being within it, using the mind and senses that have been given to you to experience what's happening. The Earth is anamorphic in the way that it continually adapts itself to your perception. And that adaptation is not an illusion or a trick. That adaptation is not subjective. The Earth is actually moving along its orbital path at about 18, 19 miles a second. In 1 second, the body of the Earth is displaced by 18 miles. But you don't feel that, do you? The setting is designed so that you don't have to feel that. So that you are free to roam about the grounds of the great experiment in the dome laboratory and not bother with that. And that is entirely intentional on the part of the designers. Even though the Earth body is moving in the universe, in cosmic space, in 5 different directions at once, at 5 different velocities, you experience it as steady. That is the operative word, steady. And as a matter of fact, there is an anecdote or episode in Buddhism which illustrates this truth. There's a name for one of the many hundreds of goddesses in Hindu Tantricism. Stevara. Sthevara. And Stevara means steady, or she who steadies. There is an incident that occurred in Buddhist legend at the moment of the enlightenment of Siddhartha, the Buddha. And at that moment, he was sitting in the lotus posture, so the story goes, under the Bodhi tree. And just as he was at the point of attaining his full enlightenment, a host of distracting and delusional forces came into his mind. That is called the host of Mara. Mara means a distraction. And so what happened at that moment was that Stevara, the goddess who steadies the earth, arose from the earth as a living presence and confirmed and validated the enlightenment of the Buddha. And in acknowledgement of the earth doing that for him, Siddhartha touched the earth, and that is called the Bhumisparsa, or the earth-touching mudra. So actually, this legend of Buddhism confirms the fact, which is a material fact, that the power and presence of the earth presents it to you in such a way that it steadies you in that presence, and you do not have to be aware of the vast dance of cosmic movement in which you are involved. That is a leading clue, a beautiful clue, to the way this experiment is designed. It is not an illusion of steadiness, by the way. It is real steadiness that allows you to walk about the earth without becoming dizzy and disoriented. The error of the flat earth people is that they assume that condition of steadiness to be the primary condition of the universe, with the earth being then a flat disk covered with a dome, which is unmoving. This is completely delusional. Everything in the universe moves. Right now, as I speak to you, everything in the universe around you is moving, and everything within your body is moving. Every microbe, every cell in your body is moving. Motion is life. So that's a lovely insight, a lovely proposition, call it what you will, to begin in the process of learning that you are in a divine experiment. Now, of course, the really big question is, well, who designed this experiment? That's a question that begins with the word who and ends with a question mark. But the answer to the question is not the same as the question in this case. So what does the living Gnosis today say about who designed this experiment? Well, I assure you, my friends, that what it says is explicit, concrete, and highly vivid in every way. It is not theoretical. And no other explanation of the presence of the human species on earth compares to this. And nothing can match this description. So according to the Gnostic view, the Sophianic narrative, which is a creation myth, if you want to call it that, the origin myth of the human species, it goes like this. Once upon a time, in the galactic center, that is the core of the galaxy where the solar system is now embedded in the third spiral arm, and the Earth is a body in the solar system. At the core of this galaxy, this material physical galaxy, live great divine beings called aeons, or generators. And they are the cosmic creative gods of the Gnostic view. And you can imagine these as great serpent powers. They are actually living currents of luminosity, and they are alive, sentient, they have will, they have self-consciousness, they have desire, they have intention. They are vast, divine, living powers at the core of the galaxy. That is their habitat, that is their home within the core. They are the Gnostic aeons. Now, the way to imagine these aeons is as artists and scientists. They are endlessly creative. the way that they exercise their creativity is by designing genomes. They design creatures. And the number and diversity of the creatures they design is incalculable. But one of the creatures they have designed is you, the anthropos. That is the term for the human genome in Gnostic teachings. What happens then when some aeons decide to initiate a new experiment like the one you're in? Well, the rule is, and they do have rules or protocols they follow, is that they work in pairs. So a couple of them, in this case, Sophia and Thelete, female and male, collaborate and they design a genome, the genome of the human species. And how did they do that? Well, they use a substance. And that substance exists in the galactic core. And as a matter of fact, that substance can be found everywhere outside the core in the galactic limbs, in various planetary systems, and even in open space. What is that substance? Just asking for a friend. It's nucleic acid. Now, nucleic acid is a kind of a gel. And into that gel, the aeonic designers encode certain attributes. This is called the calibration of the genome. So the Gnostic narrative, the home story, says that Sophia and Thelete collaborated to encode into a genome 7 particular faculties. And they constructed the DNA of that specific genome in that way. The DNA is the double helix structure that holds the calibration of the attributes and talents particular to that genome, which is you, of which you are a derivative. So what happens next? Well, after a pair of aeons has constructed or designed a genome, which is material, it's a material gel encoded with certain nucleic properties. Well, it doesn't do anything if it remains in the galactic core. In order for that genome to grow and develop into a living species, it has to be projected outside of the core to somewhere in the galactic arms. Because in the galactic arms, the 4 or 5 spiral arms circling around the galactic core like a vast pinwheel, in those spiral arms, due to the conditions that are particular to space, time, and energy out there, planetary systems arise. So the genome has to have a habitat. So how does the genome find its habitat? The aeons do something which can be compared to scientists in a laboratory who are experimenting with living substances and using a pipette. Now, a pipette is a very long needle with a bulb at the end of it. And so, for example, in artificial insemination, they use the pipette, they extract sperm from a sample, and then they use that pipette to inject the sperm into an ovum. And in every time a human being is born, nature does that in its own way. So what happens is that the aeons in their totality in the pleroma or galactic core project from the core, from its boundary, out into the galactic arms, a kind of a ray. It is actually a plasmic cylindric ray. And within that ray, within the narrow channel, they deposit the genomic plasm somewhere out in the galactic arms. You following me so far? And then what happens is that there has to be a place in the galactic arms that is favorable to the deposit of the genome. And in our case, the Gnostic intel about that is extremely specific. So, the genome, the plasm, the DNA of the human species is deposited in the Orion Nebula. It's deposited in a nebular cloud, which is identified by a tight star formation called the trapezium. And you can picture this event as if the trapezium, the 4 points of the trapezium, was like a macrame construct or some kind of knitwork, or a spider web. It's a spider web of plasmic filaments. And the genome is deposited into that spider web like dewdrops on a spider web. So there are vast amounts of the human genome nested in M42, which is the Orion Nebula, which is visible to the naked eye. So if you want to know the cosmic origin of the human species, you look in the direction of the galactic center, which you can't actually see, but you can look in its direction, and then you shift your eyes to the Orion Nebula, which is where the genome of your species is nesting right now. So what happens next? The universe is an electric medium, and it is throbbing. The entire web of the universe consists of plasmic electrical filaments, which can be detected. They have been photographed many times from these orbiting telescopes. And so there are constantly filaments or threads or currents of plasma flowing through the galactic arms. And from time to time, one of these currents of plasma will pick up one of those beads of the genomic plasm of the anthropos and carry it out into the galactic limbs. So it floats around on that current. Imagine it like a little berry carried on a current in a little brook, in a bubbling brook. This berry or seed floats around in the galactic arms until it finds a planetary environment suitable to it. And then it drops into the atmosphere of that environment. Now, this is purely a Gnostic scenario, I'm telling you, but it is also a verifiable scientific scenario. There was a physicist or astronomer named Sven Arrhenius, and he won the Nobel Prize, I forget for what. But one of the things that he was also known for is the theory of directed panspermia. And according to this theory, the seeds of life all come from outer space. And they float through outer space until they arrive at a favorable environment where they can sprout. That is exactly what happened on this earth many, many, many millions of years ago. In the full perspective of the Sophianic myth, Sophianic narrative, you learn that in fact there were 9 previous times when the anthropine genome, the same one that gives rise to you as a living human animal, seeded in different worlds. So there have been 9 experiments with the anthropic genome previous to this. So Gnostics call this experiment that you're in now the experiment of Anthropos 10, or A10. You are A10. You're the 10th strain of that genome that is nested in the Orion Nebula and originated in the galactic core. Lynn Margulis, whom I met, was the co-founder of Gaia theory, along with James Lovelock. And Lynn Margulis adopted or adhered to the theory of directed panspermia. And she said that all of life on Earth originates from outer space. And there is a certain truth in that, although that proposition can be refined and honed. And so she called those seeds of the anthropine plasm propagules. And she said that propagules were like freeze-dried particles, like freeze-dried coffee. So you can put a teaspoon of freeze-dried coffee in a cup and add hot water, and you got real coffee. So life, in order to move and float through the regions of cosmic space on these plasmic currents, must be susceptible to cold. It must be able to be preserved in cold. So the propagules are like freeze-dried particles or flakes of the genomic plasm, and they settle down and they come into the biosphere, they drift down into the biosphere of the planet, and wherever they settle, races arise. So there is no one single place on the planet Earth where the human species originated. The human species, the races of the species, originated in various places. Africa, China, Scandinavia, Polynesia, South America. It originated wherever those propagules dropped into the biosphere and into the ocean and seeded and began to evolve. That is the Gnostic perspective on what is called human evolution. So you, as a subject in this experiment, and I'll get to your purpose, your specific purpose as a subject in a moment, can consider yourself to be a tad. I like this word tad because I don't like the word people so much. So what is a tad? It is a tertiary anthropine derivative. What does that mean? It means that you are the third or tertiary expression of the mutation of the anthropine genome. Why the third? The first state of the genome was its original design in the galactic core. The second state of the genome, the second state of the anthropic genome, is a suspension in M42, the Orion Nebula, the cradle of our species. And the third expression, or derivative, is you as an animal belonging to a particular race that was seated in a particular place at a particular time. So you are a tad. You are a tertiary anthropine derivative. And of course, that's a trope to tadpole, and a tadpole resembles a sperm. So these propagules are like the sperm of the human species, and the sperm comes to life in the womb of the planetary animal mother. It's as simple as that. Nowhere in any scientific or spiritual system will you find a description of human evolution that comes even close to this. It is the paramount truth about the divine experiment on Earth. So finally, in concluding, we come to the great question, what's the point? What do the aeonic designers have in mind? Why did they create this experiment? Why did they place you here on this planet in the domed laboratory? Well, the answer comes in several ways. Primarily, they did it for fun and to find out what would happen if they did it. That's how they operate. The aeonic gods of Gnosis are not omnipotent and omniscient. They do not know everything, beginning and middle and end. They do not control the experiment. What makes the experiment interesting to them is how it's going to play out on its own terms. And that is particularly interesting because, yes, they do have an investment. Well, what is the investment? Well, go back to the pleroma core of the galaxy. When SophianicMyth designed you as a human animal, they endowed you with a specific set of faculties, skills, capacities. That is called the calibration of the anthropos, and it consists of 7 specific faculties plus an 8th factor, which is called sattva, which coordinates all of the other faculties into a synergetic unity. Sattva. Now, to conclude, because I'm running up to 40 minutes, which is a lot longer than I care to go in this present series of talks. But to conclude, I leave you with this thought, put in the form of a question. Well, if I knew the calibration of the anthropos, what would I know? Well, what you would know is what the human genome really carries. You see, scientists and biologists, molecular biologists, have been investigating the human genome since the discovery, on LSD by the way, of the double helix structure of DNA by Crick and Watson in Cambridge in 1952. Got that? But what do they know about the genome? Well, all they know is a bunch of letters and formulas. And they identify these letters, these triplets, A, C, D, G, A, C, G, C, A, whatever. They identify these nucleotide triplets as the generative complexes of certain functions, and particularly of certain diseases. But in fact, what they don't do is they don't tell you in a way that could be of any use to you what the genome actually carries as a set of cognitive and perceptual faculties. But the living Gnosis today tells you that. So suppose that you know what the calibration of the human genome is, as designed by SophianicMyth in the galactic core, then you're in a position to say, wow, I have that capacity. I have that divine endowment of nous, divine intelligence, nous, nucleic acid. I have that endowment. I am a subject, the primary subject. Let me take that to another talk. In this divine experiment. And wow, what can I do with my endowment? And how can I make the most of the cosmic opportunity of being in this experiment and living in the domed laboratory of the biosphere of the earth? Enough said, and I'll be seeing you in the beauty to come.